The vintage brass desk lamp on Gavin's workbench cast a blinding glare across his laptop. He hadn't meant to look. Audrey had borrowed it to export a gallery lookbook, leaving the screen awake when she went to fetch moving boxes. She called it decluttering. An open browser tab revealed a drafted, unsent email to her mentor, Christian. Gavin is a good man, Christian, but safety here feels like a slow suffocation. I've initiated the split on the mutual fund. The bank handles the transfer on the 1st. By winter, I'll be in London. He has no idea. The words didn't hit like an explosion. They crept in like cold water filling a basement. 9 years of shared life reduced to a clean logistical exit strategy. From the hallway, the freight elevator door clanged shut, followed by the familiar cadence of her boots. Gavin lowered the laptop lid slowly, leaving a microscopic 2-inch gap so it appeared untouched. He turned his back and picked up sandpaper, focusing on a reclaimed oak beam. "Hey," Audrey said, stepping into the studio with a tote of old art catalogs. She wore his oversized charcoal cardigan. Her eyes flicked instantly to the laptop, then to his hands, then finally to his eyes. "Hey," Gavin said, his voice level. "Find the tape." "Under the stairs," she murmured, staying on the other side of the table. "Did the laptop screen time out?" "It's still awake," Gavin said softly. "I didn't touch it." A suffocating silence settled between them. Audrey picked up her phone. "Christian emailed," she said, her tone meticulously casual. "The London gallery needs me next month, just a few weeks of logistics." Gavin watched her face. She was twisting the silver band on her finger, a nervous habit she only did when navigating a lie. "Just logistics," Gavin repeated. He looked for the partner who used to know his thoughts, but her eyes were defensive, measuring the distance. "You look exhausted, Gav," she said, reaching out to brush dust from his collar. Her hand felt scorching. Gavin didn't flinch. "Just a long week," he lied, forcing a smile. "Don't overwork," she said, kissing his cheek. "We have your birthday dinner for me tomorrow, don't forget." She walked out. Tomorrow was her birthday. He had spent months tracking down a rare print to surprise her. He realized he was going to sit across from her, raise a glass, and watch her play the part, knowing she had already erased him. The gallery's bass vibrated through Gavin's shoes, but the air felt entirely stagnant. He stood at the edge of the crowd, a warm glass of champagne in hand, watching Audrey command a circle of art collectors. To everyone here, he was just the supportive architect husband. "She's a force, isn't she?" Christian stood beside him, the mentor, the man from the open browser tab. "She doesn't stay still," Gavin murmured, keeping his voice carefully level. "True talent never does," Christian said. "We're hoping to finalize the layout for the autumn exhibition in London by next Tuesday." Next Tuesday, the email had said winter. She was accelerating the timeline. Audrey slipped away from her group, her hand naturally sliding around Gavin's forearm. The gesture felt entirely theatrical, meant for the room, not for him. "Are you two behaving?" she asked, her eyes darting between them. "Just discussing the London timeline," Gavin said softly, looking directly into her eyes. "Christian mentioned you're wrapping things up by next Tuesday. That's much faster than the 6 weeks you mentioned over breakfast." Audrey's fingers stiffened against his jacket. Her thumb found her silver ring, twisting it aggressively. "The physical layout requires an earlier presence," she said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "It's just dynamic planning." "Of course," Gavin replied smoothly. "I just want to make sure your things are packed properly. Reclaiming shared assets gets complicated across the ocean." An hour later, Gavin unlocked their silent apartment. He walked into the bedroom and opened her secondary closet, the one meant for her seasonal wardrobe. The hangers were completely empty. She had already moved her life out in shifts, leaving just enough to play the part of his partner for one more week. The brass deadbolt didn't make a sound as Gavin turned the key at 3:00 a.m. The loft was dark, save for a sharp sliver of light cutting across the floor from the bedroom. He didn't call her name. He walked into the light. Audrey was sitting on the mattress, her passport, and a one-way ticket to London resting beside her. 4 industrial shipping boxes lined the wall. She didn't startle when his shadow fell over her. "The flight was pushed up," she said, her voice entirely flat, stripped of the gallery warmth. "I leave for the airport in 2 hours." Gavin didn't scream. He walked to the closet, picked up the small velvet-wrapped package he had hidden and set it on the shipping box between them. "Happy birthday, Audrey." She looked at the box, her thumb frantically spinning her silver ring. "Gav, please don't do this. I didn't tell you because you would have tried to fix it. You fix structures, but I am not a building." "I wasn't trying to fix us," Gavin whispered, the raw devastation finally cracking his voice. He reached over and picked up her phone, which was sitting face-up on the crate. The screen displayed a notification from her bank, joint account settlement, complete. "I was just waiting to see how long you could look me in the eye while emptying our life." Audrey's face went white. She realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that he had known all week. "It was a slow suffocation, Gavin," she snapped, her guilt weaponizing into anger. "You wanted a quiet life, I wanted a big one." Gavin took a slow step back, his spine hitting the ice-cold metal of his workbench. He didn't yell. He just looked at her, truly seeing the stranger she had become. "I didn't want a quiet life, Audrey," he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence. "I just wanted an honest one." She didn't answer. She picked up her coat, grabbed her passport, and walked past him without looking back. The heavy iron door of the loft clanged shut, the echo vibrating through the floorboards. Gavin stood entirely alone under the blinding glare of the desk lamp, surrounded by the empty space she had left behind. The charcoal cardigan was still draped over the back of the studio chair, smelling faintly of Audrey's expensive amber perfume. Gavin didn't throw it away immediately. He sat down, pulled the fabric into his lap, and allowed the full, suffocating weight of the collapse to cave his chest in. For 22 days, he had operated on a 9-year delay, reaching for 2 plates at dinner, checking his phone for texts that would never arrive, waiting for the heavy iron door of the loft to clang open. But the silence in the apartment remained absolute. Then the finality arrived in a single push notification. Joint account settlement, finalized. A decade of shared grocery trips, rented moving trucks, and midnight promises was officially erased by an automated electronic signature on a Tuesday afternoon. The panic hit him like cold water. Gavin looked at his hands, realizing he had spent 9 years playing the unshakable rock for a woman who treated him like a stepping stone. He had minimized his own dreams just to keep her world steady, mistakenly believing that his value lay in being indispensable. He looked up at the vintage brass desk lamp. The glare was no longer blinding, it was just illuminating an empty room. Gavin stood up, walked to the closet, and picked up the charcoal cardigan. He carried it down the hall to the building's trash chute, dropped it inside, and listened to it slide down into the dark. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a refusal to nurse a ghost. When he returned to his desk, his phone buzzed again. An email from Audrey read, "I left my sketchbooks in the lower drawer. Can you courier them to London? I'll cover the logistics." Gavin stared at the word logistics. He didn't reply. He quietly closed the laptop lid, turned off the brass lamp, and walked out into the cool autumn air. For the first time in 9 years, he wasn't carrying her bags. He was just carrying himself. The chime above the studio door didn't startle Gavin. He didn't even look up from the blueprints he was marking with a cedar pencil. "The sign outside says by appointment only," he said, his voice level, carrying the calm authority of a man who finally owned his time. "But the coffee's fresh if you're early." "I'm not early, Gav." Gavin laid the pencil down. Audrey stood in the entryway, a damp trench coat draped over her arm, her hair slightly misted by the London rain she had brought back with her for the weekend gallery tour. She looked exactly as she had 6 months ago, but the room didn't feel small anymore. The suffocating weight that used to drop into Gavin's lungs whenever she entered a space simply wasn't there. She walked closer, her eyes scanning the raw brick walls, the new walnut drafting tables, and finally the vintage brass desk lamp. "You kept the lamp," she murmured, reaching out a manicured finger to touch the base. Her thumb was still frantically spinning the silver ring on her knuckle, the old, nervous habit. "I thought you would have thrown out everything connected to that apartment." "It's a good lamp," Gavin replied, leaning back against the edge of the workbench. He didn't cross his arms defensively. He just watched her with the same polite neutrality he'd give a stranger asking for directions. It just needed a sturdier table. A heavy, unedited silence settled between them. Audrey waited for it, the familiar shift where Gavin would step forward to fill the quiet, asking if she was hungry, asking how the flight was, trying to fix the tension. But he stayed completely still. "Christian and I split the London contract," she said suddenly, her voice dropping into a raw, uncurated frequency that felt 6 months too late. She was testing the perimeter, looking for a reaction, an ember of jealousy, anything to prove she still left an impression. "It got complicated." "Everything does when the foundation is rushed," Gavin said softly. Audrey looked at his face, searching for bitterness, but all she found was absolute, devastating indifference. That was the moment her shoulders finally dropped. She realized the eager fixer who used to bend his entire life to keep her steady didn't live there anymore. "You didn't answer my last email about the sketchbooks," she whispered. "The logistics were taken care of, Audrey. I had them couriered to your gallery." Gavin offered a small, pleasant nod. "I have a client arriving in 5 minutes. Good luck with the showcase." She looked at the exit, then back at him, opening her mouth as if to say something she'd practiced midair over the Atlantic. But the space between them was entirely unbridgeable. She let out a quiet, defeated breath, turned, and walked out into the rain. Gavin watched the glass door swing shut. He didn't look out the window to track her down the street. He walked over to the workbench, reached out, and quietly clicked off the vintage brass desk lamp. The room didn't get dark. The morning sun was pouring through the high warehouse windows, illuminating a life that didn't need a ghost to feel complete. The ultimate closure isn't revenge. It's the peace you build for yourself. Let's talk openly in the comments. Have you ever experienced that exact moment where someone's presence no longer hurt, but just felt like absolute silence? Tell us about the day you finally got your dignity back. If Gavin's journey made you feel seen, welcome to Breakup Diaries. Subscribe to join a community built on quiet strength and honest endings.